Hi, third graders. Today we're going to do mini lesson 4 from Reading Fundamentals. Yesterday and the last couple days, we've been talking about book discussions. Many readers participate in book talk groups at home or in school so they can share their enjoyment and deepen their understanding of particular text. One strategy you can use is called stop and jot, and that's where you jot down your thoughts to help you prepare for the conversations you're going to have. So today we're going to read a poem called The Twister and learn how to prepare for our group discussions. Readers get ready for book talks by carefully reading their text and thinking about interesting connections that they want to share or make points to help others better understand. Then they write them down in a safe and special place so they have them ready when it's time for a discussion. Listen as I read a poem called The Twister and share some of my personal connections to the text. So as I read, you'll notice that I'm going to stop at the end of every stanza and make a thought and write it down. So The Twister by Karen Smith. I've heard about it, I've read about it, I've seen it on TV. So when I read that, I wondered, what is the it that they're talking about? Now it's really happening to me. I'm suddenly being taken up, up, up. I see the top of the trees. I wonder if they're on an airplane or somehow they got a superpower where they could fly. I can't believe this is happening to me. I'm finally being taken down, down, down. I feel a shaking in my knees. Is this plane crashing? Did they lose their magic? Why are they falling down? It's almost over. This actually did happen to me. So, because it actually happened, I know that it can't be magic. So they couldn't have just been able to fly. I hear the screams, I hear the moans, I hear my sister yell, "Whoopee!" They're having fun, so it can't be a plane crash. Let me think about something that goes up and above the trees and then comes back down. That's really exciting, but can also be scary because they're screaming. Let's go again. Bet you can't get back in line before me. Whatever they're talking about requires them to wait in line. I remember a time where I waited in line for a roller coaster that went up high in the air and then came back down. So maybe they're talking about riding a roller coaster. As I read The Twister, I stopped and jotted after each stanza or part to think about what was happening in the poem and to develop a better understanding of what the poem was about. This strategy helps me understand the text so I can share my excitement and participate in book discussions. Before stopping and jotting, I didn't know what they were talking about. But as I read each stanza and jotted down my thoughts and my connections, I was able to figure out that they were on a roller coaster. So after reading this text and figuring out what it was about, I've made a connection. I was really scared the first time I went on a roller coaster. It scared me at first and I was nervous, but then at the end of the ride, when we pulled into the starting gate, I couldn't wait to go again. I wanted to stay on. I actually went and got back in line because it was so much fun. So let's have a discussion. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to think back to when we had our lesson on book discussions with our sentence starters, and I want you to answer these questions using a sentence starter. How many of you have had a similar experience? Pause the video and think about that for a second. How many of you are scared of roller coasters? How many of you have never been on a roller coaster? And how many of you love roller coasters? I hope you took a second to think about those things and made connections with this text. So all these things that we talked about made for a great discussion. We all have something to share based on the words of this poem and our own personal connections or experiences. Sometimes we'll read a text independently, that means by ourselves, and want to talk about it at a later date. But this is hard to do unless we write it down because we'll forget what we were thinking. So we need to make sure that we write down our thoughts and have them in a place that is accessible. That means where we can easily access it and find them, so when we're ready to discuss, we can pull out our notes and remember what we had written down. Referring back to our original thoughts and ideas in our notebooks reminds us of important points and allows us to have a more focused discussion. It's really hard to have a discussion about a book if we don't remember what we were thinking when we read it. That's why it's important to write down our thoughts. So, we're going to read another poem called Following Martin by Emma Holsoi and practice taking our own notes and then referring to them during a follow-up discussion. So what I want you to do is I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil, and as I read the poem, I want you to listen carefully and jot down what Emma's poem makes you think about, and pause the video if you need more time to stop and jot. Following Martin by Emma Holsoi. When Martin was a little boy, it made him sad and lonely to see the parks and pools and schools with signs that said, "Whites only." He knew he had to change the world, but had to do it right, and that meant working peacefully. No fists would win this fight. So let's talk about this poem. What did you stop and jot about? You might have thought the name Martin sounded familiar to you, and the fact that he sees signs with whites only sounded familiar to you. That may have reminded you of Martin Luther King Jr. In stanza 2, he had to change the world. I wonder why he's changing the world. Does it have to do with the first stanza, where he only sees things that are for white people only? And what does it mean when he says no fists would win this fight? I think that means that he's not going to use violence to get his point across. He's going to use his words. What connections can you make to this poem? Have you ever seen on TV or on a movie where people of color saw signs that said whites only? Have you ever seen it yourself? Have you ever read anything about Martin Luther King Jr.? These are connections that you could make to this poem. I want you to pause the video and stop and think about any connections you might have. One of the best things about being part of a reading community is reading and talking about the books with your friends and your classmates. Make sure that while you're reading, you're writing down your ideas in your reading notebook. You don't have a reading notebook right now, but when you come to school, you will have a reading notebook where you can do all your stopping and jotting and write down different strategies to help you remember what you read. This way, when it's time to share and talk about the books you've read, you will be ready.